planned, including exciting conversation, video clips. We have a documentary that we're screening for the first time. This is the debut. And we have the documentarian in the house, Eric Yellen. Yes, he's right here. He will answer questions about the documentary after the screening. So we're going to present our experience in Uganda last August. My wife, Alita Dent, who's Dean of Libraries here at LIU. And Eric Yellen, second-year student in the doctoral program here at LIU. We went to Uganda in August, and we were studying the effectiveness of a storytelling, story-acting activity on preschool children's school readiness skills in a rural Ugandan community library. Yes, let me introduce the team to you. The American team, actually all 4 members of the American team are here today. We have myself, Jeff Goodman, Alita Dent, Eric Yellen, and Chantel Wadler. Where is Chantel? Would you stand for us? Give it up to Chantel. She's a social worker by training, but she also works in a managerial position at the Department of Labor. And so her boss's boss happens to be POTUS, President of the United States. It's right there. So we're going to start off with the documentary. It's about 15 minutes in length, and this documentary was created by Eric Yellen. He did all the footage in the documentary, all the subtitles, everything. It's all Eric all the time. And we were very grateful to the Department of the Performing Arts here at Uganda University for lending us their $4,000 video camera so that we could take some very beautiful footage of our experience in Uganda last August. So, without further ado, we will play the videotape.
This is Masaka district. We are in Lwanunda as a village in Kitengesa.
Yeah, I'm Sugadana, and I'm here at Lwanunda, Kitengesa, in Masaka district, the central part of Uganda. And I'm working at the library, Kitengesa Community Library. Started sometime back in 1999 with just a box of books.
About 160 books in the box. My name is Kate Parry. I'm a professor at the Department of English at Hunter College, City University of New York. But I spend half of my time, or as near half of my time as I can make it, in Uganda, working on community libraries. In the mid-1990s, I had occasion to go to Uganda and decided to do my research in the village where my husband grew up. In the course of the research, I met the head teacher of the Kitengesa Comprehensive Secondary School, and he said that his ambition was to set up a community library which should be within the school but should serve the community beyond the school. And I thought this was a good idea, so I suggested that we could start immediately if I bought a box of books. And so we did that.
This is my home. This is where I grew up. That is the toilet there. 10 people live in this house. That is 10 children, including me and my mother and the father, which total up to 12.
In Kitengesa, we have just received running water a couple of years ago, but we don't have electricity. And people are mainly depend on cultivating, and the income of the people is low, it's not that big. The average income of most of the families here is less than $1,000 US. makes life not easy.
Not much was happening in the way of reading because there wasn't much material to be read. No newspapers, no books. Lots of signboards, but that was all.
So the schools here are also relatively poor. Yeah, you will find that in the whole school, for example, the neighboring primary school, they have about like few textbooks with hundreds of kids running around. So now Chitengesa Community Library is intervening in bringing these children to come to the library and access these reading materials.
When the library came into place, I was still in the primary, I was in grade 7. And I was still studying up there and didn't know what was taking place over there. Yeah. So I went to the library and asked Mr. John about the books that I can read. Of course, he gave me like traditional stories, fantasy books. I used to always borrow like a book every evening.
So we work with the schools and we work with these children. So we assess and we say like how they progress on reading, and we provide reading materials according to their needs.
We started with 160 books in 1999. We now have well over 3,000.
For like young learners, these are the books we have with few sentences and bigger ones, and familiar pictures with what is happening around here, so they can easily relate this to what is at home and what the children at home do. Then as they graduate, they come to big words and then sentences as they grow. This one, Recipe for Disaster. Yeah, it talks about like the life of like a young girl, like getting pregnant, missing school. So these things happen here a lot. So people are eager to read about and see, because they see the similarities between what is happening now and what is in the book. Yeah, these are the books which are expensive. You rarely get them in the schools. We have all the books like this one. I don't think that most schools here you would find like a dictionary of biology. We receive the newspapers, so it's the only place where people come and access the national newspapers and read what is happening and the markets and all that.
There was a literary handbook all about herself in a little house in the woods. I read books for the children aged 3 to 7 years of age. So I fetch the children from the schools and I bring them to the library. So I read the book. Round and around went the silly young folks. Then round and round again, faster and faster. After reading the book, I ask the children questions about the books that I set out. I ask them questions, they answer, and I do it once a week. I think the goal of these reading groups is getting the children to love reading books and putting the reading culture to the children, and they really like it.
So now we have 150 primary school children coming to the library every week. The secondary school also has scheduled library. So we've got this regular to and from of children, school children, to the library. And then many of those school children come back in their free time and borrow books. So I think that we can say that we've been pretty successful in encouraging people to read.
The impact of the library to the community, we've seen students who have been using the library improving in academically, and this can be witnessed by the school where we started from, and the academic performance has been going up and up and up.
Yesterday I got news that would never happen again. I was accepted in the University of Chambogo in industrial engineering.
The library has been a hub of international researchers.
Behind me is a factor of Africans. Africans are washable sanitary pads that girls and women use during their menstrual periods. In such a data research that was done by Sherry Jones, many girls were skipping school because of menstruation, so then we came up with that idea after that research of making reusable pads. And that's when Africa started. First of all, girls are getting jobs because all workers are around the villages. Second, girls are not skipping school because they can come and buy reusable packages from here.
What we're trying to accomplish here in Uganda is we want to go into the library in Kitengesa, Uganda, a rural community library, and we want to find out whether this rural community library has any kind of impact on the community that it serves.
What attracted me to this study was a couple of things. First of all, I'm a librarian, and we're studying a library. But more importantly, I'm interested in things like rural economic development and the impact of literacy development in areas where the literacy rates are very, very low. So this library is promoting reading development, and that's obviously something that's very, very important for increasing economic development no matter where you are in the world. And we think this library is a vehicle for that.
I'm an attachment researcher, and I wanted to find out whether the relationship between the mother and child, specifically her reading patterns to her child, might in some way influence the attachment patterns that she develops with the child, spending time with the child, focusing on the child, having an emotional relationship with the child through the books that she reads to the child.
My role in this research, I organized for whoever is participating into the research. I also act as the translator.
So in 2009, when we started this leg of the research study, what we found in part was that the health of the primary caregiver had some bearing on the children's readiness to learn, and we weren't sure what that was, but we knew there was something there. So one of the things that we wanted to measure in terms of the primary caregivers when we returned this year was to try and tease that out, to determine exactly what that health variable might be and how much it might impact the learning readiness of the children.
Mommy, Daddy, there's a monster in my room. There's a monster in my room.
We're evaluating 3 groups of children and mothers. One group of children and mothers are actually members and users of the Kitengesa Community Library. Another group of children and mothers are not users of the library, but they live in Kitengesa. A third group of children and mothers whom we're evaluating, they actually live in another village called Gulema, and Gulema has no library whatsoever. And we wanted to evaluate this reading group that is going to take place over an entire course of a year and compare it to other mothers and children who are not in the reading group, and then compare it to children and mothers who have not even any access to a library.
Main goal of the research is comparing the children who are into the reading groups, looking at how reading books for them has impacted their lives by comparing them to those children that we have not been reading books to.
The reading group that we're going to be assessing is the storytelling, story acting group. Children tell stories to the group leader who writes them down verbatim, and then later on they actually act them out in front of all the children. So the children get to see the stories that are acted out by the storyteller's story. And the reason why we've chosen this particular methodology is that we feel that the children telling their own stories gets them more acquainted with narrative. They watch the writing taking place, and we're hoping that this will help them gain some kind of interest in reading and reading stories and becoming interested in stories and in characters in stories.
We hope to expand the program to other community libraries and other places so that the children also get the chance to enjoy this and benefit like the children that are benefiting right now?
I think at the end of the day, our goal is really to promote development of a reading culture. And even though historically reading is something that's been associated with the West, we know that you can't separate reading from economic development. And so what we're trying to do on a micro scale is to develop models that we can then use in other rural community libraries in Uganda, in Kenya, Tanzania, Burkina Faso, Ghana, that will serve to promote the development of reading cultures in those villages. And hopefully just develop a love of reading, and that will translate into later success as they grow older and go out into the world.
Of course, a whole lot more research has been done, and it all contributes to building up the library's reputation.
Yeah, the impact of research has been really positive. Research resulted in like critical thinking of an individual person, how they benefit directly, and now there is an improvement of their businesses and their like understanding of their well-being. In the future, we see as a place for resources where you can go and get the information you need, and a place where you can support learning and research and development in the area.
I don't see the project ending with Readiness. It's not purely a local project. It's not my own pet library. It's a project that I hope will help to disseminate more productive literacy practices throughout Uganda. And the vision is the library in every village.
We'll entertain any quick questions for the director. Any questions for the director? Okay. We want to thank Eric so much for spending the time to not only video the footage that you just saw here, but also put together and edit the documentary. It took quite a number of hours for him to do that. He did it all by himself, too. So now we're going to give you a little bit of the history of the research that has been done at the Kittigesa Library, just give you a little bit of a historical overview. Valida has been involved in research at the Kittigesa Library since 2003. I think you made your first trip in 2004. She went back in 2005 again. She went to Burkina Faso to do some library research in 2007. And then we went back in 2009 and then last summer. So she's going to give you a little bit of an overview of what she's done at the Kittigesa Library in Uganda.
Okay, so basically, and I know if anybody's out there that attended our talk in 2009, you're familiar with this already, but generally speaking, the overall framework of this project is a library project. So there are a lot of subsets of research that are going on, and we're involved in a couple of different levels. But at the end of the day, the project is a library project, and we're essentially just trying to discover how this library is impacting the village. So there have been a couple of research studies that have preceded the one that Jeff is going to talk about today. We've looked at the impact of the Rural Village Library on young girls in particular. We've looked at the impact of the library on secondary school students. We've looked at the impact of the library on teachers that use the library, and also teachers from surrounding villages. And all of these findings have been published, so if you Google my name, you'll come up with a long list of articles that will actually detail the findings. But essentially, what we found is that the library is doing different things for different community members. The one population that we had to look closely at was the very young. And obviously that's where literacy starts. And so thus the birth of this project that Jeff is going to walk you guys through today. So again, if you're interested in any of the background research and how all this came to be, you know, a simple search on the internet will pull up lots of additional reading. We also have a reading list that you should have, and there are references on that as well.
You want to say a couple of things about the Uganda Community Library Association? They also got pamphlets about. Okay. So, I just want to give you a little bit of an overview of what has been going on in Uganda and sub-Saharan Africa for the last century or two. I'm just going to read this. I'm not going to read the rest of this presentation, but I do want to read this. One of the legacies of colonialism on the African continent is the widespread illiteracy and entrenched poverty that interfere with its people's full participation in the global economy. As of 1991, 54% of all Africans were illiterate. In some African countries, the literacy rate was over 90%. Africa is also the poorest region in the world and the only major developing region with negative growth in income per capita during 1980 to 2000. In sub-Saharan Africa, the average daily wage is 74 cents. The average life expectancy is 46 years, while the average child mortality rate, that's calculated as deaths before the age of 5 per 1,000 live births, is 172.5. Improvement in the literacy rate could provide the necessary conditions for an economic renaissance in Africa through mass dissemination of information that people could then use to produce goods and services in demand in other parts of Africa and overseas. The role of literacy in the functioning of the democratic process has also been noted. So, as I just read, we feel that improving literacy rates in sub-Saharan Africa, such as a country like Uganda, could ultimately result in some kind of economic boon to the people who live there. Because I'm a child researcher primarily, I wanted to take a look at how we might be able to improve literacy and develop a reading culture in the very young children who live in this particular village. The Kitagesa Library is actually part of a network of rural community libraries that have been developed in Uganda and in other Eastern and Western African countries. And it's sort of the flagship community library for this kind of research. And so I wanted to develop a study of the young children. In 2009, Valina and I went over and we studied 5 to 7-year-olds. This time around, we wanted to actually conduct a sort of an intervention. We wanted to establish a particular type of a reading activity in the Kitagesa Library. The library would be sponsoring or hosting this reading activity. And then evaluating in a pre-post kind of test experimental design, in which we went over in last August to do the pre-test of this group of children, and then we're going back next August to conduct the post-test to see whether this reading intervention actually made a difference on certain domains of child development. So I'm going to stay here for a minute. The storytelling, story acting activity is the reading activity that we're assessing. This is an activity that was first developed by a woman named Vivian Paley, who developed it in Chicago in the 1980s. And it's been researched to some extent in the United States by a woman named Angeliki Nikolopoulou. Perhaps you attended her presentation at the Applied Child Concentration meeting last November. She came and spoke. She's the chair of the psychology department at Lehigh University. This particular reading activity has certain features that I felt would be very attractive to encouraging narrative comprehension and social competence and emergent literacy in the group of children we're working with in Uganda. And we thought that they would really take to this, even though it's something very foreign to them. It involves, I mean, you can read this on your own, but the activity essentially asks children in the group to come up during a free play time and come to the librarian, and you met him, his name is Julius, he was in the documentary, and dictate a story, a made-up story, totally made up. It could be a story they've heard before, or a story that was told to them. It doesn't matter. Just dictating a story which the librarian then writes down verbatim. Okay? So the librarian writes down and transcribes these stories from various children who come up in the course of a free play situation. Writes these down, keeps them in a notebook, and then the second part of the activity is for the children to act out these stories that they themselves have told the librarian. So basically, the librarian takes a masking tape and develops a rectangle like this and asks the children to sit around the rectangle. The librarian then calls up the first child who gave his or her story, and then underlines the characters in that story. So it could be a mom, a dad, a chicken, a princess, whatever it might be. And then the child, the storyteller, has to pick out among the children, the group of children in the group, the people whom he or she wants to be the character in the characters in the story. So I want, Billy to be the frog, and I want Janice to be the mom, and so forth and so on. And then the librarian says, okay, let's act out the story together. So the librarian reads each line of the story, and as he's reading it, the children act out the movements of the story, act out the parameters of the story. Everybody understand the basic premise of this activity? I think it's really a novel idea, and unfortunately our schools aren't advanced enough to implement this in their pedagogy, but I think it's brilliant.
Just a few words. We have some video clips later on that we're going to show you of the activity actually taking place. One of the things that we're very sensitive to is the fact that this particular intervention, along with some of the measures that we conducted, obviously, in terms of the measures, they were normed on a Western population. And so there are certainly issues that have to do with cultural sensitivity and cultural relevance. Anytime you're in an area where students just don't have, or children in this case, don't have the experience of storytelling, for instance, the concept and the idea of acting was completely foreign to these kids. And so you'll see in the video clip, it takes a while to get them used to that concept and what that means to act out their own story. And we were certainly sensitive to that. It was something that we came up against again and again. This kind of activity, though, believe it or not, is much more culturally sensitive than other interventions because the stories belong to the kids. They own them. They get to dictate who's going to act out their stories and so on. So in that way, it's probably more culturally sensitive than other interventions we could have come up with.
That's one reason why we selected this type of activity. The stories are very organic, and as you'll see video clips, you'll see that they're spontaneously coming from the children. Now, Eric and I we acted out our own story just to give them an idea about how to go about doing this, so that they had some idea of what we were kind of looking for. But the stories themselves are going to come directly from the children's own experience, fantasy, etc. So the other point I wanted to make was in response to the cultural sensitivity issue related to the instruments we used. One response to that is that, we're not comparing these children to a Western sample. We're actually comparing these children to each other. So we're comparing children who've been exposed to the reading activity to children who have not been exposed to the reading activity. Now, unfortunately, we were unable to randomize the assignment of these children. It's just impossible for logistical reasons as well as moral reasons. But so we will not be able to make firm conclusions based on the data that we collect next August. But you do the best you can, and we're hoping to see changes over time anyway in the group that's been exposed to this once a week reading activity. Julius, actually, in the documentary, is the one who's actually conducting this storytelling, story acting activity over there, even as we speak. So what are the goals of storytelling, story acting? Well, we want to foster a culture of cooperation, inclusion, and collaborative learning within the library setting. The library is actually the host for this type of activity. And we wanted to promote children's acquisition of key, mutually reinforcing elements of school readiness. There are 3 domains that we assessed in our protocol of assessments. Narrative comprehension, social competence, and emergent literacy. We hypothesized that we would expect to see changes in all 3 of these domains as a result of exposure, weekly exposure to the storytelling, story acting activity. We expect that the storytelling, story acting activity would increase children's vocabulary, language complexity, story comprehension, production. They're creating and acting in their own and other stories. In so doing, they're gaining knowledge of the power of stories. Telling stories for and with their peers and acting them out together for an audience helps children develop self-regulation. As I'll talk about in the next slide, children are actually playing, but in their play, they're actually imposing their own rules, right? Stories have certain rules. People do certain things and not other things. So it's a rule-based, all social pretend play has rules that all the children have to follow in order to participate in the play. So they're learning how to inhibit certain behaviors and regulate their emotional states by playing certain roles, and they have to play them according to the storyline that was told by the child. This activity promotes children's abilities to understand others' perspectives. So we also thought that it might have an impact on mentalization, perspective taking, interpreting the behavior of others in the context of mental states, which is the definition of theory of mind, expressing increasingly complex and coherent stories, cooperating with other children during the dramatization of those stories, and enacting a fictional character and taking various characters' points of view. When you read, and Valida and I attended a conference last year, we heard the great Keith Oakley speak, very famous cognitive psychologist. He talked about the process of reading and how reading and the founding of the Gutenberg Press and the mass dissemination of actual reading materials actually influenced the way Western society anyway has been able to empathize with people different from the reader. So when you read a novel or you read a book, as you're reading through, the writer is actually getting you to empathize with the various characters in the story. That's actually facilitating your ability to take the perspective of another person. In your mind, you can actually do that. And that actually facilitates mentalization, I would argue, and theory of mind. So we were hoping to see changes in theory of mind over time, over and above developmental changes that you would normally expect to see in children. So play is a very important aspect of this storytelling, story acting activity. All children desire, this is an assumption that we're making, of course, all children desire to realize their wishes through fantasy or imagination. And when children engage in social pretend play, there are 2 interconnected components of that. There is the imaginary situation, a possible world, if you will, that a child is conveying when they're telling a story. So that's one part of it, the imagination of the child conveyed verbally to the librarian who's writing down the story. And the other part is the rules that define and create the imaginary situation. You can't have an imagination without certain rules. It's not perhaps intuitively obvious, and might seem sort of contradictory even, or paradoxical. But it's true, you have to have rules in order to have an imagination. And so when these different children, as you'll see in the video clip, are actually portraying characters in the child's story and walking around the stage, they are engaging in the following of certain rules. So they're learning how to inhibit themselves and conform to the rules of the story. Very important for the development of social competence as well as narrative comprehension. You can read the rest of this for yourself. Children experience stories contextualized by the actions of themselves and others. Because a play scenario is acted out, children can see more clearly how things fit or don't fit together in the scenario that they try to create only with words. So if you think of narrative activity as being placed on a continuum from completely motoric behavior acting out, right, to an abstract story that's strictly being told, you can see that, that narrative comprehension can flow between these two poles of motoric acting out and verbal storytelling or verbal narrative. And what the storytelling and story acting activity does is it integrates these two poles of narrative activity and brings them together and coordinates them in ways that very few other interventions, I think, would do. The other story I wanted to tell is that Ageliki, who was here last November, she's conducted the storytelling, story acting activity in a number of different classrooms. And one of the little vignettes that she includes in one of her articles is that of a child who tells a story. The story is this: a frog and a princess. That's the story. There's a story, that's a story. So then it comes time for the child to pick characters and act out the story. So the teacher in this case read the story, a frog and a princess. And so the kids were standing in the stage, and they're standing there. The child was a frog, and another child was a princess, and the storyteller, the child said, "But they're not doing it." See, in her mind, she had a whole fantasy about, probably, I'm guessing here, but the princess kissing the frog and turning into a prince. And that was all in her head, but she hadn't conveyed it verbally. And so by seeing the story acted out, she could fill in the gaps in her mind and say, and begin to realize that there are words that need to encode the fantasy visual presentation that's in her mind. This storytelling, story acting activity actually facilitates that experience in kids. Okay, so we're actually going to show you a video clip of the dictation process in the storytelling, story acting activity. It's the little girl Benita.
Children are playing. They are playing with teams.
Playing with things.
Okay. With teams.
Teams?
Teams.
Tins. Okay.
Yeah. The mother is cooking food.
The mother is cooking food.
Okay. Then the father is working and the grandmother digging.
Okay.
That's good.
That's good. That's great. It's wonderful. Now, underline the characters in the stories. So we have. He's never done this before, so
Here we have
children,
and then we have the teens.
Well, the teens are objects, right?
Okay, we have all of these here.
Okay. So we have children, we have mama,
Yeah.
we have Jaja,
And Tata.
okay? Now ask her which children she wants to play each of these roles. Okay, so Julius had never done this before, so I was kind of instructing him on exactly how to proceed with this activity. And so you can see there, he took down the verbatim story that Benita told him, wrote it down, and then he underlines the characters in the story, and then asked the child to pick children in the group to act out the various characters. So then we have the actual acting out part next.
We apologize for the back and forth with mounting the videos. It's not necessarily, it's not a smooth transition getting these videos to open.
Everybody around the table. with 10. Who's that hitting? Who's that hitting? Okay, good. And then read the next line.
Playing with tin.
I got mama from the middle. Okay, who's your mama? I got mama. Your mama? Okay, cook. Do some cooking. Tata,
Who's Tata?
Eddie Tata.
Tata?
Tata, Bola.
What's it in English?
Tata's walking.
Walking. Tata's walking. No, Tata's walking.
Yeah, he's digging.
Oh, he's digging.
Digging.
Dig. They dig in the garden. Mama Fumba. Tata dig. Play with tins.
What was that? Jaja Alima.
Jaja Alima. Jaja Alima. What's Alima? Digging. Yay! That's a good story. Yay! So you get some sense of how this might go.
That was the first time.
That was the first time they'd ever done that. So I'm hoping that when we go back in August, they'll be very proficient storytellers. I think that would be the goal there. So we went to Uganda last August with 2 research hypotheses. Children who participate in the storytelling, story acting activity once a week, higher scores in 3 domains of school readiness: emergent literacy, narrative comprehension, and social competence in children who live in Kintigesa and the other village, Gulema, which Eric mentioned in his documentary, and don't receive this activity. And then the secondary hypothesis, primary caregiver reading literacy habits, cumulative social contextual risk. This was developed on a formula by Jay Belsky at Penn State University. And primary caregiver sensitivity relating to the child will moderate the effect of group placement on school readiness outcomes. You know I'm a fan of moderational and mediational models, right? There's a moderational model right here. So, in other words, if you belong to the reading group and you have a sensitive mother, for example, those are the ones who benefit most from the storytelling, story acting activity. So you have moderational types of relationships that we're also exploring in this research study. So now we're just going to go quickly through the measures. These are the caregiver measures. Now we call them caregivers and not mothers because we wanted to pick whoever was the primary caregiver. Sometimes it was the biological mother, sometimes it was the grandmother, occasionally it was the aunt, and in one case it was the father. We have one father enrolled in this study. The mother had died, and he was taking care of the children by himself. So these are caregivers and children, and Valida and Chantel worked with the mothers while Eric and I assessed the children. So Valida's actually going to go over the maternal, or the caregiver instruments.
Actually, I'll just do a really quick overview. We're sensitive of the time. We got started late, but we know it's approaching 1:30 already. So in terms of looking at the indicators for socioeconomic status, we wanted to first gauge the types of possessions that the children, that were present in the children's home. So the children that we were looking at, we wanted to try and evaluate whether or not they had a cell phone, a TV, a car, a scooter, a tractor, cement floors. It was actually in this particular village.
We added that from this question. We added that because we noticed in 2009 that a lot of these families they had dirt floors. And so we added that as an indicator of socioeconomic status to the measure that we were using.
And so these actually provide an indicator of whether a family is working class, if there is such a thing as a middle class in this village, and so on. The supplemental questionnaire was a 25-item survey that we wanted to gauge additional information on the primary caregivers, in particular about social support. So a lot of these mothers and grandmothers and the father had very little support available to them, either from other family members or from this village. Poverty is very, very intense, and what we find is that families are pretty much on their own. It's a polygamous society, and so husbands frequently have more than one family, which contributes overall to this, to the very low levels of social support that these families or that these mothers and these primary caregivers have access to. So we wanted to evaluate that, and we essentially just asked 3 questions: who can you confide in? Who would you be able to turn to in an emergency? And who would you be able to turn to help care for your family if you ended up in the hospital and had to have some type of major surgery? Just in terms of, again, I'm going to go through this really, really quickly. We also looked at the physical health and the quality of life, and we also did a very, very short depression scale for the primary caregivers. Again, these were the indicators that we found in 2009 were having some impact on the children. We just didn't know how. We didn't know what those pathways were. So we looked at, on a daily basis, how the primary caregivers felt, whether they experienced pain in their daily lives, whether they were able to do certain physical or work activities like carrying a jug of water up a hill, whether they could jog. They also told us, by use of the Dartmouth co-op charts, which is anybody who's familiar with, these are graphic charts that the caregivers or a patient essentially points to. They're like smiley faces almost. So if you're feeling really, really good, you know, there's a broad smiling face and you point to that. If you're feeling terrible, you point to the smiley face that has the frown. We didn't want to use a lot of language-based measures with the primary caregivers because they don't speak English. So this was seen as being much more culturally sensitive. This instrument has been previously used in Uganda, so that's another reason that we selected it. And then another part of assessing for depression, we used a standardized health survey. We chose 9 items and we looked at whether the person had felt nervous or down in the dumps or very, very blue and depressed for a period of time, and we use that as our depression scale.
I just want to make a comment. 2 slides ago, you noticed the total possessions. You saw the electricity supply, television, DVD, recorder, all of that. We were using an instrument that was standardized in sub-Saharan Africa, where some people do actually have electricity supply and do have those items. I can assure you that in these 2 villages of Kitiges and Gulema, we assessed 79 children and mothers. 1 family had electricity, and we found
they had 1 solar panel.
Yeah, they had a solar panel installed on their roof, which gave them like enough electricity for a light bulb. So there was no televisions, there was no DVD recorders. I just want to make that clear. So, cumulative social contextual risk, these are some of the indices of risk that have been previously supported in the literature. As I mentioned, Jay Belsky had developed a similar social contextual risk variable. And so we essentially added all these variables together to construct one measure or index of risk. And what we found actually is that the measure of risk did not correlate with any of the outcome measures, interestingly. And I think the reason possibly is that there was an attenuation of range, which means that the range of scores in our sample was so small because everybody is poor. There's really very little disparity of income. In this society, there is a massive disparity of income. You've got the Warren Buffetts of the world, and then you've got the homeless, you know, a few blocks away from each other. Over there's really very little, if any, disparity in income or socioeconomic level. So it'd be hard to get significant findings on this variable. So just very quickly, the first domain of children's development that we assessed was narrative comprehension. we wanted to get a baseline on their narrative comprehension, and so we tried to assess for oral retelling, picture sequence task, single picture task, which is sort of like a CAT or a TAT, and a spontaneous story task. And what we found, I'll just give you the short answer to this question, it totally bombed. None of these kids could do any of this. And I think one reason is that these children don't have the ability to tell narratives in an decontextualized fashion. Remember I talked about the poles between totally acting out narrative and telling us, the storytelling using words, and that everything belongs on a continuum. These particular tasks fall more on the verbal mediated end of the pole of narrative activity. And these children just don't have that capability. And so, interestingly, the attachment story completion task, which requires some narrative comprehension, but which involves actually acting out dolls, they did much better than on these tasks. So after the first 2 or 3 children, we decided to drop these instruments from the protocol because we weren't just getting anything out of them. Children's social competence was a big area that we assessed. We administered 5 theory of mind tasks, a recognition of emotion task, which is kind of like a Peabody for emotions. If you're familiar with the PPBT, there's 4 facial expressions, different, and you give them a word like "show me happy," and they have to point to the facial expression that matches happy or embarrassed, and they get increasingly difficult, obviously. So that's recognition of emotion concepts. A play interview, how well can they engage in pretend play, symbolic play. There's a day-night task and tapping test. These are both tasks that assess inhibitory control. So we tell the child, okay, we show them a picture of nighttime, and we say they have to say day. And we show a picture, we fool around with their minds, okay? We show them a picture of a sun in daytime, and we tell them to say night. And so we show these pictures, and they have to say either day or night, depending upon the opposite of what they would normally say. So they have to inhibit their initial response and say the non-dominant response. And with the tapping test, it's similar, but it's motoric and auditory. So if I tap twice, the child has to tap once. If I tap once, the child has to tap twice. So the knee-jerk or reflexive response would be to tap exactly the way I tap, to imitate me. They can't do that. They inhibit that initial response and do the opposite. So two taps is 1 tap, 1 tap is 2 taps. And then the attachment story completion task is a semi-structured interview with 5 story stems. The child is presented with a series of story stems using a family of dolls. They have to complete the story stem with using the family of dolls, and from that information we can then categorize these children into 1 of 4 attachment categories: secure, anxious avoidant, anxious resistant, or disorganized. And actually my coding team is going to be coding the attachment story completion task, not for attachment, but for symbolic play, so that we have a measure of their pretend play in a situation in which they did better. It's more contextualized, they're actually acting out in addition to telling a story. So we have some video clips for you. The first is the theory of mind task. This is a particular task that involves a tea box and something inside the tea box. Okay, that's a good guess. That's a good guess. Okay, this is a tea box. Everybody in Uganda knows what this is. Here's a tea box. What do you think is in it? Ghana is tea and Uganda tea.
Okay. Let's look inside the tea box. What is it?
Z is a pig.
Pig. Alright, so what's inside the tea box? Here comes the girl. She has never looked inside this tea box. What does the girl think is inside the tea box?
So in that little scenario, you know, the little girl comes up and doesn't know what's in the tea box, so what does she think is in the tea box? Now, the participant, the child, knows that a pig is inside the tea box, but an independent person coming in, never seen the tea box before, is going to assume that tea is in the tea box. So she correctly assumes the mind of the little girl character and says, oh, she thinks that tea is in the tea box, even though I know that really there's a pig in there. That kind of assessment, and there are 4 others like that, assess for theory of mind. And this little girl actually did have a very high score on the theory of mind scale that we used. Now, yes, okay, so now I want to give you just a little taste of the attachment story completion task. This is a girl from the village of Gulema, and I'll say this, that this girl tells a very atypical story for this task, and so I thought it would be intriguing and interesting to watch this as it unfolds. This is the story stem called The Monster in the Bedroom Story. Okay? It's bedtime. Go to bed now. Go to bed now. Okay, Mommy and Daddy, I'm going. And Naka goes to her. And then she says, Mommy, Daddy, there's a monster in my room. There's a monster in my room. Show me what happened.
Is also going to go to bed.
Okay. Show me. Show me.
It's night now, they're going in bed.
It's night now, they're going in bed. Where?
She's beating her.
She said that?
She's beating her.
She's beating Mommy, Daddy, and Seika. Why is she beating them?
They're stabbing the mom.
The dad is stabbing the mom? With what? Where's he stabbing her with?
The mom has to go and cook food.
But she's stabbed. What happened?
Seika sleeps on Naka's head.
Seika sleeps on Naka's head. Oh. Who's hitting Seika? Who's hitting Seika?
She's just
Who's hitting mommy? Who's hitting mommy?
Mama nyamutawanya.
She's the one. Oh, she's hitting Naka.
Bakugambye ekisige ekiri mu kisenge. Ekisige ekiri mu kisenge bagenda kukikola bati. Kiri mu kisenge ky'omwana. The monster is going to be buried in Naka's head.
The monster's going to be buried in Naka's head. Okay, that is an extremely atypical response for an American sample, for a Ugandan sample, it doesn't matter. But I just wanted to give you a sense of the kind of richness. I mean, this is a very rich story, you have to give me that. That can be gleaned from administering the attachment story completion task. And in spite of the fact that, you know, this would obviously be classified disorganized in the attachment category system, classification system, nevertheless there was symbolic play going on there. And my coding team is going to be coding this story. So we want to just, while I was doing all this work, I wanted to show you what Eric was doing. Okay, just a minute. So that's what Eric was doing while I was busting my butt. But no, actually Eric worked very hard. That was one of the few times that he got a chance to play with the kids. But you know, we're going in August, and Eric has agreed to come back with us, and we're taking 2 other students, unnamed so far. But we're hoping to continue to make this kind of an annual event. So if this looks like fun, if it looks like something you'd be interested in doing, please get involved in the coding team meetings, get involved in the research group, and we're going to try to continue to take people in subsequent years to Uganda. Getting back to the third index that we assessed, we looked at children's emergent literacy. We had 2 instruments that we used to assess emergent literacy. One was the Khalifi picture vocabulary test. This is a test that was developed by a researcher in Uganda, and it's a receptive vocabulary test. Works just like the Peabody. 4 pictures. You say the word, and the child is to point to the picture that depicts the word that you just said. And all the pictures are very culturally appropriate. Like firewood is one of the pictures, and so you have to point to the firewood. You know, things that the child is actually very familiar with in his or her environment. Then we have the Bracken Basic Concept Scale. This instrument did all the heavy lifting. It's like a Woodcock-Johnson for preschoolers, is the best way I could describe it. And these are the 5 different areas that were assessed using the Bracken. Their colors, their letters, their numbers and counting, sizes and comparisons, and then shapes. So we had them do these 5 subtests. And we use that in this particular pre-test study as the outcome variable, the Bracken.
Just one really quick item about the picture vocabulary test. In 2009, we did use the Peabody. And the Peabody, we tried. The Peabody contained images like an Eskimo, an igloo, and I remember the penguin. And these children had absolutely no concept of what those images were. And it was at that time that we began to understand that we needed to use measures again that were beyond being culturally sensitive. These measures, and as far as we could control that, using measures that had been created specifically for this population. So we found them pretty.
Okay, so we collected data on 79 children and caregivers, and these are just some of the descriptive statistics. You'll see that the average, I'll just point out a couple of them here. I want to go through these kind of quickly. The mean age was about 4 years, 8 months, and we accepted children from age 3 to 5. 5 being 5 years, 10 months actually is the maximum. And then the minimum was 3 years, 0 months. I think it's probably all I want. Oh yeah, and gender, the mean percentage was, or the percentage was 51% was male. So pretty evenly balanced, but that's actually not true of the specific groups. Next. Okay, so then with the descriptive statistics by group, we had 28 kids in the future storytelling, story acting group, 30 kids in the comparison group. These are Kintigesa children who are do not belong to the library, and hence will not be not participating in the storytelling, story acting activity. And then a comparison group to the comparison group and the experimental group of Gulema children. These are children who have no access or exposure to a library at all. And as you can see on certain indices, unfortunately age was significant, so we'll have to control for age when we do the post-test analyses of the data, as well as gender. There were many more males for some reason in the Kintigesa comparison group than the other two groups. But down here is what I want to show you. Theory of mind, the tapping test, and receptive vocabulary. Either the Kintigesa reading group or both the Kintigesa reading group and the comparison group were greater than the Gulema group. Now, one argument or one explanation for that is that the children in Kintigesa have a library in their community. And so the benefits that the caregivers have received by virtue of the library being in their community has already trickled down and started to affect the abilities of the children in certain domains that we assessed, versus the Gulema kids whose parents have had no access to reading materials or any kind of a library at all. Most of them, I don't think, did any of them know how to read, the caregivers? A handful in the Gulema sample. So I just wanted to show you those descriptive statistics by group. And we've got the zero order correlations among the variables. Just wanted to show you down here the school readiness skills. We had correlations with child age, which we would expect, pretend play, recognition of emotion, where they had to point to the face that corresponded to the emotion that we communicated to them verbally, theory of mind, and then tapping test, and obviously receptive vocabulary. So a lot of these other indices correlated very positively with school readiness skills, which we would expect. So emotional complexity and the understanding of emotional life in oneself and others, and understanding the mind of the other, actually is correlated with level of school readiness as measured by the bracket, you know, colors, shapes, letters, comparisons and sizes. There are relationships there. So emotional health is obviously related to school achievement, preschool achievement. So then I took the variables that were positively correlated, significantly correlated with school readiness skills as measured by the bracket, put them in a multiple regression equation, and lo and behold, it was a very significant prediction, squared multiple R of 0.36. But look at this, the only variable that predicted school readiness after controlling for all the other variables of the equation was the tapping test. Very interesting. And so I was thinking about why the tapping test might be related after controlling for everything else while the others aren't. And one idea that I had was that the tapping test actually assesses motoric inhibition of behavior. It's not really not verbally mediated at all. You could actually, Eric and I actually administered this task with almost no verbal instruction at all. It's merely watching and listening. And they were able to do that. But maybe some of the other tasks were a lot more difficult. They were verbally mediated and were actually going through a translator, so they're hearing everything secondhand. We're not actually able to speak Uganda, unfortunately. So that was an interesting finding. Then, you know me, I like mediational models, so I had to test a mediational model, right? So I found out, I learned that depression on the SF-36, that was the measure that Valita had talked about. There are 9 items. One of those items was, I have been a happy person within the past 4 weeks. That variable was correlated with both school readiness skills, composite score on the Bracken, and theory of mind. So I want to see whether maybe theory of mind might have mediated the relationship between the depression item and school readiness skills. And lo and behold, as you can see here, depression becomes non-significant in step 2, and theory of mind is very significant. And the F change is significant as well. So there was a mediational model that was supported here. So what does that mean exactly? Well, depression was actually positively correlated with theory of mind. You wouldn't expect that, right? You would think the less depressed the mother is, the more available she is to the child, and the freer she is to pick up on the child's signals, which would cultivate theory of mind. What I think might be going on here is that this is a self-report measure. The depression measure was self-report, and so mothers who were depressed might have been, in the interest of social desirability and maybe interpersonal desirability, denied their depressive feelings. So those mothers who were more willing to acknowledge their feelings of depression were probably more willing to acknowledge a range, emotional range in their children, which would allow the children to develop their own theory of mind independent of their mothers. Eric had an alternative explanation of that. I don't know if you want to pass on that, or Eric and I have talked about this particular issue and what this might mean. But we thought this was very interesting. Next slide. However, when we control for age, the children's age, and the receptive vocabulary score, actually the mediational model actually disappears. So we're not sure whether this is a real finding or whether it's spurious based on receptive vocabulary in the child's age. So a summary of findings. The assessment instruments could be culturally biased. We couldn't use any of the narrative comprehension instruments. We had to drop those. Telling a story based on pictorial stimuli is an unfamiliar process to the children because they are unaware that a pictorial symbol carries a meaning that can be expressed verbally in the construction of a story. Children's memories are not processing information in a linear manner required of understanding a text. They don't have that practice, that facility. These children seem to perform better on highly structured tasks that contextualize meanings with actions. That's why I think the storytelling, story acting activity is perfect for this population, because they can actually see a verbally told story acted out at the same time and get a better comprehension of that narrative. Cumulative social-contextual alerts did not predict school readiness skills, perhaps because of the attenuation of range I talked about. Non-verbally mediated self-regulation, that's the tapping test. Predicted readiness skills, school readiness skills after controlling for receptive vocabulary. And children's theory of mind mediated the relation between caregiver depression and school readiness skills. People are leaving, so we gotta wrap up.
We're almost done. So just in terms of the next steps, Jeff has already talked about this. We want to return next August to conduct to figure out what's been happening over the course of this year, during which time the intervention has been going on. And just in closing, really, the socio-cultural implications of this project. So why are we doing this? Essentially, in the documentary, Dr. Kate Perry said that the vision at the end of the day is a library in every village. That's it in a nutshell. That's what we're aiming for. So the point of all this is demonstrating that these rural village libraries, which are very small, this library is more highly developed than libraries that you'll find in other Ugandan villages, but the idea is to take this model, to replicate it, and in order to do that, you really need to have data and evidence that it's doing what you think it should be doing in part. And we think that one of the things that it should be doing is contributing to the development of a reading culture, but also helping to prepare the very youngest library users for school, so that when they enter school, they're at a level that we hope would have them be successful as they continue on through elementary, primary, and secondary school. So we're looking at programmatic development. We're looking at being able to target library programs that help the primary caregivers. So in the areas that we've determined that there are issues related to the primary caregivers and their connection with their children, is there a way that the library can become instrumental in helping these primary caregivers to work with their children and to help them learn how to read and so on. Reading to culture is the key for economic development, and we also obviously want to be able to continue to measure the children's progress and the impact of the library longitudinally. So over time, this is something that we hope to continue to look at.
You know, I didn't present any attachment data, and the reason for that is that I no longer care about attachment. No. No, it takes some time to code attachment data, and I have to hire somebody to do it, and so I wasn't able to present those data. But we're going to continue to collect attachment data in August, and if anybody's interested in participating in this research, maybe getting a dissertation idea out of these data, you're welcome to contact me or contact Valida about it. We have tons of data now that are just waiting for somebody to analyze and write up. So there are dissertation possibilities here. There are also possibilities of joining us in Uganda in 2013 and beyond. And these are the unsung and sung soldiers of this project. I just want to give a shout out to my students, many of whom are here. Caregiver and child transcription right here, right there. They're the backbone of this operation. And I don't know if Tina Lowe could make it today, but Tina is the American project coordinator, and she was instrumental in pulling everything together and kind of organizing things. Our Ugandan project coordinator, Julia Sentumi, whom you saw in the documentary, was very pivotal in organizing things overseas for us, and continues to lead the storytelling, story acting activity. Paul Forresto actually provided some funding for Eric to go to Uganda, so we want to thank him in particular as well for being helpful in that regard. Any questions? That's the team. Anything at all? Thanks for coming.
Thank you all for